Welcome back, focused learners. I am so incredibly excited to guide you through this explainer today. We are going to explore the invisible threads that connect literally every single living thing on Earth. We'll start small, imagining we're building a tiny aquarium right on our desks, and then we're going to zoom all the way out to understand the massive planetary scale systems that keep our globe spinning safely in space. So let's dive right in.
All right, here is our roadmap for the day. First, building an ecosystem. Then, food chains and webs. Third, the flow of energy. Fourth, biological magnification. Fifth, the ozone layer shield. And finally, managing our garbage.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Building an Ecosystem. Okay, I want you to mentally grab your lab coats, because we are going to build a tiny world of our very own. Let's imagine we're setting up an aquarium together. What do we actually need? Well, we can't just throw a fish into an empty glass jar. We need water, right? We need an oxygen pump to keep that water aerated. We're going to need some fish food and maybe some aquatic plants. By putting all these pieces together, we're actually replicating nature. But to really understand how this tiny world functions, we need to categorize exactly what we just put into our tank.
You see, an ecosystem is simply all the interacting organisms in an area along with the non-living constituents. And we split these into two main buckets. First, you've got your biotic components. These are the living things. In our tank, that's the fish and the aquatic plants. Second, you have the abiotic components. These are the physical, non-living factors. Think about the temperature of the room, the amount of sunlight hitting the glass, the minerals in the sand at the bottom, and the water itself. A forest or a lake, those are natural ecosystems. But our little aquarium, that is a human-made artificial ecosystem.
Let's look a bit closer at the cast of characters in our tank. First up, the producers. These are our aquatic plants, which use sunlight to literally make their own food, like sugars. Then we have the consumers, our fish, who depend entirely on those producers to survive. But here is a critical question for you. What happens if we never, ever clean the tank, and a fish dies? If we do absolutely nothing, the water's going to get murky and toxic really fast. Enter the absolute unsung heroes of our ecosystem, the decomposers. These are microorganisms, like bacteria and fungi. They have the super vital, kind of messy job of breaking down dead remains and waste into simple, inorganic substances. Those substances go right back into the water, ready to be used by the plants all over again. Without decomposers, the whole cycle of life just stops.
Moving on to Section 2, Food Chains and Webs.
Now that we've built our aquarium, let's zoom out and see how these characters interact in the wild. In nature, organisms feed on one another in a very specific sequence. This sequence forms a food chain. I want you to think of trophic levels as rungs on a ladder. At the very bottom rung, we have our autotrophs, or producers, capturing the sun's energy. Step up to the second rung, and you've got herbivores, the primary consumers that eat the plants. Step up again to the third rung, and you find small carnivores. Keep climbing to the fourth rung, and you hit the larger apex carnivores. Every single step represents a distinct trophic level.
But let's be real for a second. If you walk into a forest, a rabbit doesn't just eat one single type of grass, right? And an owl definitely doesn't only eat rabbits. Animals have diverse diets. Because most organisms are eaten by two or more other kinds of organisms, a simple straight-line food chain doesn't really paint the whole picture. Instead, all these relationships form a massive, tangled network of branching lines. We call this a food web. It's this incredibly dynamic, interdependent grid where almost every species is connected to multiple others.
Section 3, the flow of energy.
Okay, so what is actually traveling through this massive web when one animal eats another? It's energy. And here is an absolute, unbreakable rule of our environment that you have to remember. Energy flow is strictly one way. Think about it. The energy that plants capture from sunlight is converted into chemical energy. But once it's captured, it doesn't magically revert back to the sun. As it passes from the plants up to the herbivores, it never goes backward. It moves relentlessly forward, and at every single step, a massive amount of it is lost to the environment as heat. That's energy that can never be used again by the ecosystem.
Because of this continuous massive heat loss, we encounter what's known as the 3 to 4 step limit. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you have a bucket of water, but the bottom is full of holes. You pour that water into a second leaky bucket, then a third, then a fourth. By the time you get to that fifth bucket, there is barely a drop left. That is exactly what happens to energy in a food chain. The loss at each step is so huge that very little usable energy remains after 4 trophic levels. That's why food chains almost never go past 4 steps. And because the energy is most abundant way down at the bottom, there are always a far greater number of individuals at the lower trophic levels, meaning you are always going to have way more blades of grass than you have lions.
All right, Section 4, biological magnification explained.
Now, this delicate energy balance is amazing, but what happens when human-made chemicals crash the party? Let's talk about pesticides. We spray them to protect our crops from diseases, but those chemicals don't just vanish into thin air. First, they wash off into the soil and water. Second, they get absorbed by plants right along with water and minerals. And here is the scary part. Many of these chemicals are non-biodegradable. They literally cannot be broken down. So, an insect eats the plant, a frog eats the insect, and a snake eats the frog. Because the snake has to eat a lot of frogs to survive, the chemical accumulates progressively at each trophic level. Finally, since humans occupy the top level of any food chain, the maximum concentration of these harmful chemicals gets accumulated right in our own bodies. This is called biological magnification. It's exactly why just washing your fruits won't remove all the pesticides. The chemicals are often built right into the cells of the plant itself. Crazy, right?
Section 5. The ozone layer shield.
Let's look up from our dinner plates for a second and turn to the sky to check on our planetary defense system. There's a deeply interesting paradox about ozone. Down here at ground level where we breathe, ozone is actually a deadly poison. You absolutely do not want it in your lungs. But high up in the stratosphere, it performs a totally essential function. It acts as a massive planetary shield, wrapping around the Earth and protecting all surface life from the sun's highly damaging ultraviolet or UV radiation.
Let's step up to the virtual whiteboard for a second. I want you to literally visualize the invisible atomic chemistry of how this shield is built. Imagine a normal oxygen molecule, O2, floating high in the atmosphere, just 2 oxygen atoms holding hands. Step 1. A high-energy UV ray from the sun comes crashing in like a pair of microscopic scissors, snipping that bond and splitting the molecule into 2 free, highly reactive oxygen atoms. Step 2. One of these lonely, super-energetic oxygen atoms bumps into an intact O2 molecule nearby and grabs hold. Step 3. Boom! They fuse together to form O3, 3 atoms of oxygen bonded together. That is ozone. It's actually the very UV light we fear that powers the creation of our own shield.
But back in the 1980s, scientists noticed the ozone layer was dropping sharply. We were literally tearing a hole in our own shield. The culprit? Synthetic chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. We use them all the time as refrigerants in fridges and air conditioners. When they drifted up into the atmosphere, they completely unraveled the ozone molecules. But here is a massive success story for global cooperation. In 1987, the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, forged an international agreement to legally freeze CFC production at 1986 levels. It became mandatory to manufacture CFC-free appliances worldwide. It just goes to show that when humanity actually acts together, we can halt catastrophic environmental damage.
Section 6. Managing our garbage.
From the heights of the stratosphere, let's bring it all the way back down to Earth, right into our own kitchens. Every single day, we generate mountains of waste. But not all garbage is created equal. On one hand, we have biodegradable waste, like fruit peels or grass clippings. These are degraded by biological activities. Remember those decomposers we talked about? They can eat this stuff and turn it back into soil. It naturally decomposes. On the other hand, we have non-biodegradable waste, like plastics. These are completely alien to nature's decomposers. They are not degraded by biological activities. They just sit there, remaining in the environment for a very, very long time, piling up and causing immense ecological stress.
Let's apply this to a real-world scenario from your textbook. Think about the disposable cups they used to serve tea in on trains. Originally, they were plastic. Cheap, sure, but completely non-biodegradable, which led to massive littering problems. So people suggested a natural alternative, coolhads, which are traditional cups made out of clay. Sounds totally perfect, right? They decompose. But wait, making millions of clay cups every single day requires digging up vast amounts of fertile topsoil, literally destroying our agricultural land in the process. The environmental cost was just too high. So the shift was finally made to disposable paper cups. It's a brilliant exercise in critical thinking, guys. It shows us that managing our environment requires weighing the hidden costs of every single choice we make.
All right, let's wrap this all up. What have we discovered together today?
We've learned that our ecosystems are deeply, deeply interdependent, from the autotroph fixing sunlight all the way to the decomposers recycling the remains. We understand that energy flows strictly one way, acting like a leaky bucket that restricts food chains to just a few steps. We saw how human-made chemicals like CFCs threatened our ozone layer, but also how we successfully fought that. And finally, we realized that the sheer volume of garbage we generate creates serious environmental challenges that we have to solve.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final, provocative question, straight from your textbook exercises, to ponder. If all the waste we generate is biodegradable, will this have absolutely no impact on the environment? Think about that. Think about the sheer volume of billions of people throwing away waste, even if it eventually rots. Would the decomposers even be able to keep up? Would it affect the smell of the air, the quality of the water, the spread of microbes? Let that little butterfly effect marinate in your mind as you look around the ultimate web of life today. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
All right, welcome to your Exam Masterclass Explainer. Today, we're cracking the exact scoring blueprints that SSLC evaluators use to grade Chapter 13 of your biology paper, Our Environment. If you're looking to literally maximize your score on the Karnataka board exams, you are absolutely in the right place. I'm going to show you exactly what the examiners are scanning for, where students routinely drop those silly marks, and how to write answers so tight they leave zero room for deductions.
Okay, so here's our high-yield checklist for today. We're hitting ecosystems and unidirectional energy, the biomagnification mark trap, securing those ozone depletion marks, and waste management guaranteed threes. Let's dive right in. Section 1. Ecosystems and Unidirectional Energy. The examiner's favorite 2-mark question. So, look at this specific question. Flow of energy in an ecosystem is always unidirectional. Why? When you see this pop up, don't panic. And please, whatever you do, don't just write a vague, rambling paragraph. The official key answer specifically requires 2 distinct scientific points to give you full marks. Let's look at how to construct that. You want to stack your answer on the paper exactly like this. Point 1. Energy captured by autotrophs does not revert back to the solar input. Point 2. Energy passed to herbivores does not come back to autotrophs. Writing it out exactly this way guarantees your 1 mark for stating it's unidirectional and the 2 half marks for these specific reasons. Evaluators are literally scanning your page for the words autotrophs, solar input, and herbivores, so give them exactly what they want. Now, while we're on ecosystems, we absolutely have to talk about decomposers. If they ask about the role of decomposers for 2 marks, hitting these 3 points leaves absolutely no room for point deductions. 1. They break down dead wastes of plants and animals. 2. This keeps the surroundings clean. And 3. They maintain ecological balance. Boom. It's a simple 1-2-3 punch that guarantees your full marks. Moving on to Section 2, the biomagnification mark trap. Let's secure your trophic level scores. Okay, this is where I see some of the absolute smartest students lose silly half marks. Why? Because they forget crucial keywords. If you're asked to define biomagnification, you must include the words non-degradable and higher trophic levels. If you just write, chemicals build up in animals, you're going to lose the mark. The examiner needs to see that you understand that chemicals are non-degradable and that the maximum concentration happens at the higher or top trophic levels.
They'll often ask you to construct a food chain to show this. Under exam pressure, just use this super simple mnemonic, GGFS. Grass, grasshopper, frog, snake. Easy, right? Just remember to draw your arrows pointing from left to right to show the energy flow. And please, never draw the arrows pointing backward.
And here it is, the classic mark trap. The paper's going to ask, which organism has more accumulation of harmful chemicals in this food chain, and why? You need to explicitly name the top predator. Literally, write down the word snake. Then state that because these chemicals are non-degradable, they accumulate progressively, meaning the top level has the maximum concentration. Don't just say the last animal, name the snake.
So why does this happen? Well, remember the 10% law? Energy gets diminished progressively at each level. Only 10% transfers up. It's kind of like a leaking bucket, which is exactly why food chains rarely go beyond 3 or 4 steps. There just isn't enough energy left. But while energy rapidly decreases, those non-degradable toxic chemicals do the exact opposite. They maximize.
Section 3. Securing ozone depletion marks. Let's grab some rapid-fire 1-mark strategies here.
This next question is an absolute favorite for the examiners. Which synthetic chemical is responsible for the depletion of the ozone layer? This is a direct hit on the multiple choice or 1-mark short answer section. You gotta know it cold.
The answer, of course, is chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. Write it clearly. Honestly, if you're worried about spelling chlorofluorocarbons under the ticking clock, just writing CFCs in capital letters is completely acceptable according to the official board key answers. That is the exact keyword the evaluator is hunting for.
Let's lock in a few more high-yield ozone facts. First, ozone is a molecule formed by 3 atoms of oxygen, so write O3. Second, if they ask about its importance, never just say it protects us. That's way too vague. You have to specify that it shields the Earth's surface from ultraviolet or UV radiation to get that full mark. And finally, just remember it was the UNEP agreement in 1987 that successfully froze CFC production worldwide.
Section 4. Waste Management Guaranteed 3s. This is the ultimate 3-mark comparative hack. Take a look at this. Write the differences between biodegradable and non-biodegradable substances with an example. When the paper asks for a difference, evaluators expect a clean, direct comparison. Do not just write 2 separate paragraphs, okay?
Instead, draw a crisp T-chart exactly like this. On the left, biodegradable, breakdown by biological processes, do not remain intact in the environment and less polluting. On the right, non-biodegradable, do not break down by biological processes, remain intact for a long time, and more polluting. Putting your points side by side like this makes the evaluator's job so easy, and an easy evaluator is one who's happy to give you full marks.
But watch out, here's the ultimate half-mark trap. The question specifically asks for examples. A comparison without examples is incomplete. You always want to write cow dung or vegetable peels at the bottom of the biodegradable side, and specifically write DDT or plastic for the non-biodegradable side.
Now, examiners also love a good application question. They might bring up the textbook example of disposable cups and trains. If you see this, explain the evolution clearly. Plastic glasses? Total non-biodegradable hazard. But when they tried switching to clay kolhads, well, that wasn't perfect either. You need to clearly state that making millions of clay cups led to the loss of fertile topsoil. And that is exactly why paper cups, which are biodegradable, became the better alternative.
Which brings us to a crucial question straight from your exercises. If all the waste we generate is biodegradable, will this have no impact on the environment? You've got to think like an examiner here. A massive excess of biodegradable waste can cause foul smells, breed mosquitoes, overwhelm local decomposers, and totally throw off the ecological balance. So never assume biodegradable just means harmless. Even natural waste in excess has a massive impact. Think about that as you prep for your exam, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.